What's up, guys? It's Tuesday. I know that for sure this time. I'm not just making it up or deciding whatever day I think it might be. It's been a good week. I feel like it's been a while since I've done one of these. It's kind of weird. Last one I did was when right after I went to therapy, which was a weird time, as we all know. I had some really interesting conversations, even just this morning, that I was really thinking about and really just trying to unpack appropriately. And I don't know, I was pretty happy with it. It was a friend of mine. We were just going to talk about different styles of communication and relationships and things like that. And one of the things that we got to talking about was being a very logical person. I consider myself, I guess, to be an extremely logical person, and often it can come off to people as like cold, and it's never the intention, but it's you kind of accidentally, or I guess unintentionally, kind of draw your line in the sand with a lot of things, because when you're very logical, you think, at least, in your own mind, you think that you have a very strong sense of right and wrong. And when a person is logically driven, they often look at things that they deem to be simple or just day to day or easy, very black and white. And that's hard for some people, because some people are not overly logic driven. They have a healthy, or sometimes more, amount of emotion in their decision making. How things are perceived, how things are said or framed, means a lot to certain people. And often you'll find yourselves in friendships and relationships that are often different. Logically driven people are often around emotionally driven people, and vice versa. And it's probably because those two things kind of make up for the absence of one or the other in those people. And so it kind of helps round people out that way when you're logically driven and emotionally driven. At least, I don't know, I'm rambling. The point is, we were talking a lot about being logical in an illogical situation and expecting some sort of different result, or some sort of logical result. And it got me thinking. We were talking, and I basically was like, look, I said just that. I was like, look, in these situations, you're being hyper logical about something that is not logical. Therefore, that hyper logical stance won't work. And for you to keep banging that drum and trying to force this person or any other person into submission, if you will, to see your point of view, they're not coming at it from the same frame that you are. If you look at a situation and you see it, for whatever it is, like you gave your word, I'm holding you to that, and that's the way it is forever. Like, for me, I totally get it. I definitely get it. You want to be able to rely on people, and it makes sense to hold them accountable when they don't live up to those things. But at the same time, if you know that this person is not the hyper-rational, hyper-logical person, yet you still try to come at this problem or disagreement or the communication from that lens, well, then you're being a crazy person. Because if they've never been that person and they don't do those things, they don't see it that way, you're basically just trying to force this person into submission. And I think that's where a lot of communication breaks down, is at its deepest level, at its most root level. Everyone has these inherent beliefs. A lot of time I call them shoulds. You have these things that people should do or should believe or should think, just based off of what makes sense to you and where you came from. But we never think of it that way. We just think of it as like, this is the most logical, rational thing, and therefore every person does that. And then as a result, miscommunications happen. But what I'm getting at is, when we hold people to this standard that we've created because it's what we believe, what we feel, and they don't live up to it consistently, whose fault is it? My personal opinion is that it's now your fault. Because you can only control yourself at the end of the day. And if you can only control yourself and you continue to showcase this pattern of consistent failures, you're holding this person to this standard or this rationality, quote unquote, that you have deemed acceptable, but they never do it. It's now your fault, because after showcasing this pattern, you know that they're not going to live up to it. And that doesn't make them wrong. It just makes them them. Trying to apply your will to another person does not make sense. You might think that you're on the moral high ground or on the rational high ground or reasonable or correct or whatever you believe. But it really doesn't matter when it comes to other people, because they may see things completely differently. And this is kind of a callback to a recording that I did a few weeks back, with regard to people's perspectives and how I look at other businesses and other industries to solve complex problems. And what I'm getting at is, just because you aren't familiar or don't understand how or why a person believes or does or communicates or anything, like with literally anything, doesn't make them wrong. You may just have zero perspective on how they grew up, on their culture, on their beliefs, or any of that. And so going into a communication or a discord or anything like that, where you try to apply your sense of beliefs, morality, values, any of that, upbringing, rationality, and just applying it as rule, you're asking for an argument. You're asking for a breakdown in communication. Because the fact is, you just don't know where they're coming from. So coming at it with anything other than an open mind is going to be difficult. You're going to invite a little bit of chaos, a little bit of discord. It's like that old saying, right? You don't know what you don't know. And I think when it comes to people, I definitely do this, and I'm sure other people do as well. I like to assume a lot about human nature. I like to think that I know a lot of things. But I will say that I'm consistently surprised by people and their beliefs and their rhetoric and their culture and all these different things that I, used to believe was pretty kind of substandard, if you will. It's just nice and easy. You didn't have to think too hard about it. I used to think that people were all very, very similar, and as a result, could be easily kind of categorized and identified based on behaviors and personality profiles and things like that. But the more I grow and the more I learn, the more I talk to different people and meet different people, the more I realize that I don't know a damn thing. That's not true. I know some things, but for the most part, to walk into a conversation with an agenda is quite difficult. You can have a desired outcome, you can have, a point you want to get across, but how you do it with every person should be pretty open-ended, with zero expectations. Because as soon as you start to draw lines in the sand, to go back to that reference, you're going to be wrong at some point and you're going to invite discord. Now, that's not to say that you're supposed to have perfect communication every single time. That's not it at all. If that's what you're hearing, then I'm sorry that I'm rambling on. But the idea is to recognize the patterns and to be able to step back from the interaction itself and start to put together a better process, a better strategy. If you know that a person finds your irrationality to be cold and off-putting, I'm sorry, did I say irrationality? I meant rationality. If I did say that, then sorry. But if someone finds your rationality to be cold and off-putting, and you know that, then driving more rationality into them with conversations and interactions isn't going to solve that problem. It doesn't make any sense to keep doing that same thing over and over again, hoping to achieve a different result. It doesn't make any sense. You're going to overcome their defensiveness with more of the thing that they're defensive about? I don't think so. The better strategy is to think about how that person responds and how they communicate back and what sort of patterns they showcase that might help you find a way to communicate more effectively. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to argue with their friends or their spouse or really coworkers, really anybody consistently. Nobody wants that. Everybody wants to just kind of do their thing with minor or minimal intrusion or nonsense, really. At least I do. So I'm speaking for myself, I guess, but I like to think that most people prefer to do things in a way that is the least intrusive or annoying for no reason. And so that communication is going to be super necessary. Now, you could inherently avoid every interaction that you're not comfortable with, but it's, for lack of a better term, it's going to make you a pussy. Sorry for that. But what I mean is, hard things are always going to be hard. So it's not about avoiding those things or them getting easier. It's about you growing and getting better, getting more capable of dealing with discomfort or dealing with confrontational exchanges. Or if you have listened to any word I've said in the last 10 minutes, learning how to alter your own behaviors in order to better communicate from person to person. So some people are going to be like, I shouldn't have to change. I don't need to change. People need to accept me. And I'm going to say, shut the fuck up. Everybody wants to be an individual and they want to be themselves. Fact. I am no different in that regard. I largely want to be left alone, and I don't really care what anybody thinks. So I do the things I want to do, such as listen to country music, show tunes, and James Taylor while I do squats. I don't care. But what I'm getting at here is everyone wants to be an individual. Everyone wants to be accepted for who they are. Yes, correct. But to say that every single person just has to deal with you, regardless of the situation, scenario, or otherwise, doesn't make any sense. To me, it kind of reminds me of that saying, like, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. And what I mean by that is, if every person just had to deal with every aspect of a person, regardless of scenario, the workplace would be terrible all of the time. Because how can you accept every piece of someone, but also not change yourself at all and be accepted by everyone all the time? Now, maybe I'm super ignorant. There's a good chance of that. But I don't see how those two things coexist simultaneously in their fullest capacity without anyone giving any room to wiggle at all. So the way I look at this is the best form of acceptance for any given person is to listen and identify the most effective ways to communicate with that person, to make subtle changes and observations in order to be the most successful in the interactions that you have. I don't think you can curate your environment or build an environment in which you will never have to be around or speak to a person who doesn't make you uncomfortable in some way, or who you don't want to spend time with all the time. I think it's far more likely that our environments happen to us in one way or another, whether it's work, family, people we meet on the street, whatever. I think it's far more likely for us to just meet people whom we don't fully get along or don't accept as like part of our tribe. And as a result, you're going to meet a lot of different types of people. And maybe some of them you do like. Maybe some of them are like your person, but they came up so differently, their communication is so different that you guys argue all the time about stupid shit. Maybe. But the point is, if you avoided every possible interaction or held everyone to that impossible standard of accepting you in your entirety, then you wouldn't be able to do the same for them. So I just don't think it exists. So I guess the biggest point I'm getting at here is grow up. more so observing patterns and learning and executing on different styles of communication doesn't mean that you have to change who you are in order to appease another person. It just makes you smart. It makes you aware of how to communicate with different types of people to accomplish whatever mission you have. Because people are the ultimate resources. No person is going to be an island. They need other people, especially to be the most successful at scale, whether it's in a family or in a business. It's very difficult to do things alone, at least in the way that provides the greatest return, the ultimate reach, if you will. So that's kind of what I was thinking about. I think people desperately want things to go into boxes, and that's why they have a hard time communicating, because it's that whole left brain, right brain thing. If you've ever read anything, Fast and Slow was the name of the book. The name of the author escapes me. But then some other books by Charles Duhigg are also similar and very good, but about habits and just kind of human behavior, why we do certain things, why we think certain ways. I'll tag those in the show notes, just in case anybody's curious about those. I really like Thinking Fast and Slow, and I really like pretty much anything by Charles Duhigg. But what I'm getting at is, the whole left brain, right brain. You have, your immediate emotional kind of fast response brain, which is largely responsible for our survival as a species, as far as evading predators and responding to conflicts, kind of fight or flight situation. It's helped us survive a lot of negative things and take on a lot of positive things. And then you have, your slower brain, your more logistics and logically driven brain. It's considered to be a newer development, comparatively to the fast portion. And that fast brain, that emotional brain, really wants things to be reacted to. They really want to put things into buckets, to identify things quickly. And that makes sense. I mean, being able to identify things is all about, if you really, really boil it down to its simplest parts, it's all about risk profile. If you can quickly sort through risk profile on any given thing, then your chances of survival increase, and your chances of pain, suffering, and death decrease. It sounds kind of messed up when I say it like that, but you'll follow me. And so what I mean by that is, you look at people, friendly, not friendly, friend, foe kind of deal. You look at things as far as sustainable, dangerous, and I think that's probably where stereotypes come from, is that fast, emotional response, wanting to put things into a box, is that for me or not for me kind of thing. I was talking to one of my team members on my staff the other day about this same thing, and just why people put themselves in boxes or put other people in boxes. And so we were talking about this very thing, and yeah, I think that's probably it, because when you have time to sit and think by yourself, you don't appreciate it as much. You don't, you want to be seen as more of a complex individual creature. But when you're out in the world and you have to respond to stimulus rapidly, you don't think of it in the same way, because I'm sure you're guilty of it as well. And I hate to use the word guilty, because it's like a natural human thing to like identify patterns and put things into boxes and like determine safety or friend or foe and all that. So I hate to use the word guilty, but I'm sure you do it all the time, because like that's a thing about humans that we do, right? But when you're by yourself and you have more time to like process and go through, people don't appreciate that as much. And I think that's probably at the center of most miscommunication and discord. That fast reaction to do whatever you've identified as your thing. So I don't think it's ever going to be an easy thing to do, to just identify the pattern and be able to move from there. I don't think that's going to happen. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is take every opportunity you get with these interactions that you have with people who maybe don't share your same logic or rationality or views or values or culture. Take all those opportunities and start to build these little patterns, so that way when you're in these high stress or quick exchange situations, you can reflect back and make a choice rather than just react and provide a response. If I were to say, that's fully unpacked, that would probably be it. Yeah, I really think so. I think that's got to be the center of most miscommunication. I personally think most people are good and well-intended, but I think most people are human, right? I think most people have a set system of beliefs, culture, values, morality, all these different things. I think that for a lot of people it's probably just too much to consider, at least in the immediate, in that short term, what another person might view as the same, like for themselves, where they were coming from, how they communicate, what their values are. And I think that's why most conflict happens in the early stage, acutely. Terrible things, miscommunication, wars, fighting, all those things. They all happen, for the most part, in an instant. And it's usually when there's a miscommunication of some sort. Because most people are well-intended. It's when you're not thinking, you're not considering the other person, you're not processing, you're not you're not going through that slow, logical brain, that you react to something based off of your internal code, if you will, your first response. One of the ways that I think about this is, you ever get into a fight with somebody about something, like an argument even, and as you're talking, you're realizing that you're both arguing the same thing, and it all came down to how one person in the discussion or argument at this point like misunderstood a word you were using, or that word meant something to them and it didn't mean anything to you at all. It's kind of like a throwaway. I think about stuff like that a lot, and how silly it is. How something as simple as the execution or the understanding on an individual level of a word could cause like a whole argument, a whole thing. Because, again, I'm like a hyper rational, logical person, and for me, I think about like how inefficient is that for communication? How ridiculous is it that as like quote unquote higher beings, higher level beings, right? We have all this ability to create, and technology and art, and all these discussions. We drive cars. we we have all these abilities to do things. Yet the likelihood of us arguing over the understanding or the execution of a word we both commonly have can lead to an argument. And then at that point, what are you doing? You're just arguing about nothing. You're arguing about the argument. But the argument would not have happened if it weren't for the misunderstanding or misuse, whatever side of it you're on, I guess, of that particular word. How stupid is that? It's pretty dumb. I think about that a lot, mostly because it just comes from our inability to see and understand the complexity of the person in front of us, or in some places just be willfully ignorant and just not care. How inefficient is that? I don't know, I feel like I might be droning on about this, but it's obviously a topic that I think about all the time and consider often. But that seems just silly to me, that that's a thing that people do. I guess the moral of this is to, when communicating with a person whom clearly shares different views or morality or culture or whatever than you, step back from yourself and start by just acknowledging that fact. I think by doing that alone, you'll be able to erase the lines, if you will, on what's acceptable communication, what's offensive, what's rude, what's ignorant, all that. And if you can step back from yourself and just acknowledge that you know nothing about this person's views and all that, and you can just accept that they're likely similar, at least in the most simple way, that they're probably a decent person. They probably want similar things. Again, keeping it simple with regard to being able to do what it is that they want or need to do with the least amount of hassle or intrusion. And if you know those things and you believe those things, it'll likely be very easy to move forward with the discussion or conversation with a clear head and without inputting any of your own predetermined rules. If there's no rules, no one can break them. You know, no one can do something that's unacceptable to you if there isn't a predetermined acceptable versus unacceptable. I guess this is a long-winded way of saying keep an open mind. Step back from yourself. Don't be so responsive to people without understanding where that responsiveness is coming from in yourself. Does that make sense? This kind of circles back to a topic that I talked about, which is if you're in the conversation, you're 50% of the experience. Don't point fingers, don't blame, don't react, don't get crazy with anything, because you're 50% of the problem if it's a problem. If you're in traffic, you actually are traffic. It's not happening to you. You are contributing to it. So, for the sake of not beating this to death any further, I'm going to end it here, because I could probably just ramble forever, but yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I'd like to hear about what people think about this. I'd be really interested in hearing how people think this might apply to them and whether or not it's tangible, or if there are things that we could be more clear about, things that could be more practical, I guess, as like a tool during conversations. I'd be interested in if people were thinking about that or interested in that at all. So let's pick this up later tonight. We'll see what's on my mind and go from there. Maybe a couple of cool guests to come pretty soon. All right, guys. As always, you know the deal. This has been the Marset Perspective. I really appreciate you guys for listening, especially considering, it's not my intention. Again, thank you guys very much, and please do reach out. And I am very curious with regard to people wanting tools or wanting more clarity on how to utilize these concepts. All right.